This is a CBS 12 News special report, Hate Rising, Antisemitism on Campus, sponsored by Morse Life Holocaust Learning Experience.
Pro-Palestinian protesters assaulting someone holding an Israeli flag.
I'm sickened and frightened by the news that has come out of Cornell University.
Cornell, Yale, Harvard, Columbia have alarmingly become hotbeds for anti-Semitism.
In Manhattan, Jewish students at Cooper's Union barricading themselves in the college's library earlier this week after being chased there by a mob of anti-Israel demonstrators.
President Biden has been clear. We can't stand by and stand silent in the face of hate. We must, without equivocation, denounce anti-Semitism.
Well, John, Jewish students at some of the most prestigious universities in the country say they now don't feel safe or even welcome.
A sharp uptick in anti-Semitic attacks happening in America and around the world. The threats and fear, especially right now on college campuses.
According to the state, some national chapters of Students for Justice in Palestine have shown their support for the terrorist organization Hamas, which is why they're being banned. In a memo to university leaders, the state university system of Florida said it would dismantle chapters of the group Students for Justice in Palestine due to the group's support of terrorist groups.
Hello, I'm Jim Grimes. This is a special presentation, Hate Rising, Anti-Semitism in America. There was a time when college campuses were thought of as either ivory towers full of scholars with their heads in the clouds or raging party schools where anything goes and academics take a backseat to getting wasted. But in the past 7 months, what Americans have seen on campuses across the nation is something ugly. Open, sometimes violent anti-Semitism has been on display nationwide, often ignored or even condoned by leadership at some of our most renowned universities. In our roundtable discussion on anti-Semitism in America, we'll be looking at anti-Semitism on campus, where it comes from and how it's grown so extreme right under our noses.
Seemingly just hours after Hamas terrorists raped, murdered, and kidnapped hundreds of Israeli civilians, protesters on college campuses across the United States were marching. But what many Americans didn't expect was that so many of those demonstrators would be supporting the terrorists. Pro-Israeli students were attacked by protesters praising Hamas, and the clashes spilled into dorm rooms and classrooms.
At NYU, I hear calls to gas the Jews, and I am told that Hitler was right.
I, along with most of campus, sought refuge in our rooms. As classmates and professors chanted proudly for the genocide of Jews while igniting smoke bombs and defacing school property.
According to the Anti-Defamation League, since the October 7th attack, there's been an unprecedented spike in anti-Semitic incidents against Jewish students on campus, including violent assaults, intimidation, and harassment. Even more astonishing, college administrators across the country seemed baffled about how to respond unless they were defending Hamas supporters' rights to express their hatred for Jews and Israel.
The basic foundation of a college experience has to first of all be that students feel physically safe. And that's obviously a major issue.
Dr. Joshua Shanes is an associate director of Jewish studies at the College of Charleston in South Carolina. He believes strongly that peaceful demonstrations and protests can be a source of healthy debate, particularly on college campuses.
Being safe means not being personally attacked verbally and certainly not physically. At the same time, we're not going to be safe from ideas that challenge us. I mean, one of the points of college is to challenge everybody to reflect on their beliefs, reflect on what they've learned growing up and what they already believe, and to think twice about it, think 3 times about it, not to necessarily change their minds, but they're going to be confronted with ideas that they find, unsettling. And we're not trying to stop that. We have to have space for these tough conversations, but we have to make sure they happen in a safe way, right? I'm not always going to feel comfortable.
But incidents on some campuses have gone far beyond tough conversations, like this protest at the Tulane campus that turned violent, or the threats posted on college message boards at Cornell calling for the death of Jewish students.
I think that the headlines kind of scratch the surface. I think this has been an issue for a while. I think that it's unfortunate that it took October 7th for people to finally realize it.
Tyler Fokshner is a first-generation American. Her family is from Israel. She transferred to FAU from Drexel in Philadelphia because of the hostility she experienced on campus.
The little Israeli flag in my Instagram bio, I got death threats, I got a lot of hateful messages.
Tired of feeling helpless, she's now a campus activist working to support other Jewish students and build bridges with classmates she believes are simply misinformed.
I think that's the issue with my generation, is sometimes we see things on social media or we see an influencer and we just believe what they say blindly. But we have to be independent thinkers.
What seems clear is there is a significant anti-Semitic, anti-Israeli presence at many American colleges and universities, and these individuals and groups are actively spreading lies and fomenting anti-Jewish hate unchecked on campus, a reality many Americans were completely unaware of before Hamas terrorists attacked Israel last fall.
We're joined now by our panel of experts for discussion on the topic of anti-Semitism on campus, where it comes from, how it spreads, and what can be done to fight back. Immediately to my left here is Josephine Gaughan. She's the Executive Director of Community Affairs for the Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County. Always great to have you, Joe. Next is Tyler Fokshner. She is who you just heard from in our piece. She's an Israeli activist and campus leader for Hillel of Broward and Palm Beach counties. And finally, we're joined today by Dr. Charles Asher Small. He's the founder and Executive Director of the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, based in New York, and Cambridge University in the UK, where he is also a member of the faculty there. And of course, thank you, all of you, for joining us today. And Joe, let's start with you. As we had just heard in our opening piece, a lot of Americans were shocked to see the immediate and organized pro-Hamas response to many of our universities in the wake of the October 7th attack. But you've been talking about this problem for a long time. Tell us what's happening here.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Yes, exactly that. This is not a new phenomenon. This is not a new phenomenon on college campuses. For many years, this has been part of the uptick in anti-Semitism that we've seen generally in the United States. And the college campus has been the epicenter of what we call the sort of progressive, left-wing, anti-Zionist anti-Semitism. It's often started on college campuses and it's fed on college campuses, often by the faculty, the general environment, the way things are taught, the ideologies that are being pushed to students. And we've been seeing this for years. There has been pro-boycott, divestment, anti-sanctions movements, BDS movements on college campuses, die-ins, apartheid walls. This has been an ongoing feature of campus life for a very long time for our Jewish students who have felt marginalized, unsafe, and even threatened. What happened on October 7th is the curtain was pulled back. And this sort of orgy of anti-Semitism, if one wants, that has been really focused very much on students and college life, has just pulled back the curtain, and now we see it in full force for what it is. And the threats to students has been exponential. You know, just some of the statistics I'll give you. The Anti-Defamation League, who monitors anti-Semitic incidents, in a period between just October 8th and December 7th, found the most anti-Semitic incidents in a 2-month period that they've ever found in their 40 years of reporting. Also, between October and December, anti-Semitic incidents rose 323% across the entire country. And unsurprisingly, 73% of Jewish students feel unsafe, feel threatened. They are now making choices about which university they go to, not based on academia, as we see here, but on where they could be safe, where they are going to be protected. And we're seeing universities that are not protecting their students. They are not enforcing their own rules of conduct, and they have a different standard for Jewish students than they do for anybody else.
Tyler, you were, so to speak, on the front lines of all this as a college student yourself. You were at Drexel. You left there. Tell us a little more about why.
I was asked to found a pro-Israel group on campus, students supporting Israel, and just because of my association with that group, I was getting tagged on Instagram. I was getting DM'd. I can't believe that they're allowing these people on our campus. I can't believe you guys are baby killers, terrorists. You guys are supporting apartheid. And a lot of my friends hid their Star of David. They hid their identity because of the sense of fear that they felt being connected to Israel because of the way it's demonized on college campuses when it really shouldn't be.
Charles, let's just kind of switch it up a little bit. I know you're part of your work is establishing the study of anti-Semitism as a recognized academic discipline, and that puts you kind of in a unique position here. You've worked to understand this age-old problem in an atmosphere which is openly hostile in some quarters of college community.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. And hearing Tyler and Josephine, I think what's really important for our viewers to realize is that anti-Semitism is not a parochial problem for the Jewish people or for Israelis. Anti-Semitism, as Elie Wiesel, famous professor and witness to the Holocaust, he always taught us that anti-Semitism begins with Jewish people, but it never, ever ends with Jewish people. That once this form of hatred is unleashed upon society, it knows no bounds, and it attacks human decency, and it attacks the institutions of democracy. And I think that's very important. And what's happening on campuses to students in the United States of America, the greatest democracy on the planet, is criminal. It's criminal. And it's being instigated by organizations, student organizations that are directly connected to the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is a social movement that started in Egypt 100 years ago that takes the anti-Semitism of Europe, the European anti-Semitism, the protocols of the Elders of Zion, the foundations of Nazism and fascism, and fuses it with a perversion of Islam. Not Islam, not Muslims, but a perversion of Islam. And this social movement is now backed by Qatar. Qatar is pouring billions and billions of dollars into American University, a country of less than 350,000 citizens. Qatar is giving more money to American universities than any other country in the planet. They're giving tens of billions of dollars at least to universities and funding Students for Justice in Palestine. Students for Justice in Palestine that comes out of the Brotherhood, like Hamas, like Hezbollah, like Qatar. The Students for Justice in Palestine say they're not just supporting Palestinians, they're not just supporting Hamas, they claim that they are Hamas, they are in the struggle. So we have student organizations in the United States of America that are promoting and supporting terror organizations on campus, which is extraordinary. It's against the law. And they're also, this is sort of the shock troops on campus, but maybe even more damaging and more dangerous is you have increasing amount of scholars, professors in the classroom who argue intellectually that the Jewish people are white supremacists. So imagine, we had the social scientists and the theologians and the professors of eugenics in Nazi Europe were saying that the Jews were not white, and they were poisoning the purity of the white Aryan race and had to be eliminated. Today, intellectual clowns, I call them clowns, are saying that Jews are white, and they're not saying Jews are white and welcome to the club and we're terribly sorry for what happened during the Holocaust. In less than 2 generations, Jews are white. We've become white supremacists, supporters of apartheid, supporters of colonialism, of occupation, and now of genocide. And professors teach that at Harvard, at Columbia, I was at some programs at Columbia and NYU, where they're teaching that the occupation has to be resisted, and what Hamas did, pulling people out of their homes, murdering them, raping, mutilating them, was justified as part of the resistance to end the occupation. All of Israel is occupation, and it was the Jewish people's fault for being on the land which invited the violence. These are coming from professors at American universities, funded by the Muslim Brotherhood. So this, to me, and what the Muslim Brotherhood wants to do is sort of push Israel away from the United States and from the West and alienate it and isolate it, and use anti-Semitism to fragment and weaken the United States of America. And they're doing an excellent job. Israel is the small Satan, according to this twisted worldview, and the United States of America is the big Satan. So we have to remember that this is a a strategic threat to the United States of America. America is now erupting in violent anti-Semitism, and you have professors and students calling for the support of Hamas while they're holding American hostages. It's never been done in the history of our country.
I guess the big takeaway is this is a well-organized and apparently well-funded movement that we're seeing unfold. When we come back, we're going to revisit the shocking Capitol Hill testimony from presidents of some of America's elite universities in the wake of the anti-Jewish protest on their campuses, testimony which cost some of them their jobs.
You're watching Hate Rising, Anti-Semitism on Campus, a CBS 12 News special report.
Will admissions offers be rescinded or any disciplinary action be taken against students or applicants who say, from the river to the sea or Intifada, advocating for the murder of Jews?
As I've said, that type of hateful, reckless, offensive speech is personally abhorrent to me.
Today that no action will be taken. What action will be taken?
When speech crosses into conduct that violates our policies, including policies against bullying, harassment, or intimidation, we take action, and we have robust disciplinary processes that allow us to hold individuals accountable.
What action has been taken against students who are harassing and calling for the genocide of Jews on Harvard's campus?
I can assure you we have robust
what actions have been taken? I'm not asking
actions underway.
I'm asking what actions have been taken against those students.
Given students' rights to privacy and our obligations under FERPA, I will not say more.
Calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct? Yes or no?
If the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment. It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman.
It's a context-dependent decision. That's your testimony today. This is the easiest question to answer yes, Ms. McGill.
Looking back on that testimony 4 months later, it is still hard to believe that these college leaders simply were unwilling to acknowledge the problem, which to most of the country was obvious and needed a clear, forceful response. Charles, you've worked at some of the premier colleges across the globe. We're talking about Yale, Stanford, Columbia, Oxford, the Sorbonne, and even Harvard. What's your big takeaway? Did we see a failure of leadership?
We've seen an absolute failure of leadership. It's astounding that the head of a university can't condemn the call for genocide against members of the community, the Harvard community or the academic community, be it faculty or students. But I think it's indicative of the sort of intellectual climate in the classroom on these elite university campuses. And we believe at our institute at ISGAP that part of the reason for this is the funding of American universities by the Muslim Brotherhood. We just came out with a report on last Tuesday. We discovered $10 billion given by Qatar to Cornell University, which is another hotbed of anti-Semitism. We found $1.3 billion, even though Texas A&M was trying to hide it, between Texas A&M and Qatar. Texas A&M in this agreement gave all of the intellectual property rights to the Qatari regime, which is astounding. We found 502 research projects in this agreement, and we flagged 58 as possibly having military dual-use projects and research, as well as a dozen that could have dual use for nuclear weapons research. And this is going to Qatar from Texas A&M Research. Qatar, as we know, has good relations with their neighbor, the Iranian Revolutionary Regime, which is trying to build a nuclear device. It houses the leadership of Hamas. It has a good relationship with the Taliban that forbids women from going to school. This is the agreements, and we have 6 American universities in Qatar. So it's a strategic threat to the United States and to the stability of the region, and anti-Semitism is being used to divide us, and it's alarming.
They always say follow the money, right? You had mentioned your organization was instrumental in preparing some of the hearing documents. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So we've been doing this project on follow the money for almost 8 years now. And we found tens of billions of dollars going to American universities. American universities are not, as required by American law, reporting their funding, foreign funding, to the federal government, as they must. And we're finding unreported money coming from foreign sources, but there's also more money coming from domestic sources. The Qataris have over $1 trillion in assets, which they're using for soft power by putting on the World Cup, buying football teams, sports teams, real estate, trying to portray themselves with the use of American PR companies as a sort of honest broker in the Middle East when they're really the front for the Muslim Brotherhood. So we've uncovered tens of billions of dollars. There's probably a lot more. If we found tens of billions, I'm sure there's more. And they're influencing our most sensitive institution in our democracy, namely education.
So you truly believe that they are trying to buy their way into our universities, and not just trying, but they are doing just that?
Yeah, I don't believe it. We've, through our research, we've proven this beyond a doubt that they are, and we have more reports coming out. Next week we'll have a report on the Students for Justice of Palestine, how they're also funded and a part of the Muslim Brotherhood. We have reports coming out on MIT, Georgetown, and other elite universities that are peddling anti-Semitism and anti-American ideologies that's designed to weaken our country. And I think it's a strategic threat, not just for Israel and the Jewish citizens that go to our American universities, but for the United States as a whole.
That is alarming. Tyler, you were telling me that you went to Florida Atlantic University, where you are now. It's been a mostly positive experience. They came out with a pretty strong statement after the October 7th supporting Jewish students and the staff. Do you think FAU would be considered a model for other universities? FAU
not only issued one statement, but they issued two statements after October 7th. And it just makes us feel a lot safer. I mean, at first I was a bit scared. I have a bunch of my Jewish and Israel necklaces under my dress. And I was hesitant to wear it. I was even hesitant to come back to campus. But because of Hillel and FAU and their administration and how they reached out to us and told us that we have a safe place on campus and that they won't tolerate any form of anti-Semitism, that I feel confident to speak up and to advocate for the Jewish people and for the state of Israel.
Joe, you think that this, do you think that this allows or perhaps even encourages this kind of thinking at the highest levels? What do you think's behind that?
Well, I think Charles clearly elucidated what's really behind it. But there's also it's no coincidence that those three women, the elite universities, are the worst. They're not the only ones, and certainly not every university has this. But it's become a function of, as I mentioned earlier, there's this anti-Zionist anti-Semitism that has fed into or created the idea that Israel is everything bad and evil. And it's located in universities because that's where our youth are at a point in their lives where they're discovering things and learning about society and tend to be progressive. And when you start labeling everything or analyzing everything in terms of particular constructs and ideologies, which are rampant on these universities, like looking at every humanities subjects in terms of a construct of colonialism, for example, or race, essentialism. And then you start looking at other world issues through a lens and coming to particular conclusions. And you frame this anti-Israel hatred in terms of human rights, that this is the side of good and just, and therefore everybody who agrees with Israel is therefore unjust and evil. I mean, it is a clear anti-Semitism. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism defines three elements around Israel that are anti-Semitic. When you delegitimize, demonize, or hold Israel to a double standard. Just ask yourself, if she had said, calling for the lynching of black students violates our code of conduct depending on the context, we wouldn't have had that same conversation.
When we come back, final thoughts from our panel. Stay with us.
This has been a CBS 12 News special presentation, Hate Rising, Anti-Semitism on Campus, sponsored by Morse Life Holocaust Learning Experience.
We've just spent the last half hour talking about so much wrong on campus, violence, hate-mongering, and the lack of leadership. Before we go, we'd like to ask our panel where we go from here. And if you could talk about the good things that are happening on campus right now, and if the pendulum is maybe swinging in the other direction, or if at all. And Tyler, let's start with you.
Well, people fail to acknowledge that there's so many students like myself that are working to combat this new rise of anti-Semitism on college campuses. And there's so many organizations like Hillel that have been a source of education, a source of support for advocating for not only our Jewish students, but our Zionist students, and creating a safe place on our campuses.
And that's extremely important. And Charles, what are your thoughts as we sit here 6 months after the Hamas attack? Anti-Israeli protests, sit-ins, and other demonstrations, they're still happening on our campuses. On a positive side, I think as Tyler was saying, there's more awareness of anti-democratic forces using anti-Semitism. I think the Jewish students and faculty are sort of waking up out of their slumber, which is positive. I am heartened by some of the responses in our Senate and Congress. We're presenting a lot of our materials there on a regular basis. I think the Congress is taking this very seriously. And I believe that if universities continue to demonstrate discrimination against any group, they may lose their Title VI funding. And I think that is a good stick to be using. Universities have to provide high quality liberal education. They can't trade in this, entrusted mission, which is so fundamental to our country, so important to our country, for 2 pieces of silver from a reactionary social movement that's willing to give them billions of dollars to change what a liberal education is all about, and allow and even encourage, genocidal rhetoric on the campus, intimidation on the campus, and intellectuals teaching this crap as philosophy and high caliber scholarship when it's not. So I'm encouraged that people are beginning to realize what's at stake. Joe, I know we've only scratched the surface here. What are your final thoughts? Is there any hope?
Hopefully there's hope. I have to agree with both my colleagues here that the marvelous young Jewish students who are standing up, who shouldn't have to, gives one great courage and hope. I think Charles is absolutely correct about the universities and the funding and all of that. I guess the hope is, it's a bitter thing because it's the curtain being pulled up and the waking up from the slumber. People cannot now ignore this. We're at an inflection point here about our college campuses, about the state of anti-Semitism, and we need everybody. And I think if we can get people to realize what is at stake, what is going on, that this has to be fought. And if the leaders of these institutions are not going to step up, then they need to be replaced.
I want to thank our panel for sharing their insight and perspective on this issue of anti-Semitism on college campuses. Dr. Charles Asher Small, founder and executive director of the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, based in New York and Cambridge in the UK. Tyler Fokshner, who's with Hillel USA and a student over at FAU. And Josephine Gaughan, who's the director of community affairs with the Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County. For all of us here at CBS 12 News, thank you so much for joining us.
This has been a CBS 12 News special presentation, Hate Rising, Anti-Semitism on Campus, sponsored by Morse Life Holocaust Learning Experience.